For Love or Money? Billionaire Romance. By Nola King. Description:
After my staff left me hanging, I was a billionaire forced to fend for myself. But the grocery store might as well be Mars, and I wouldn't have made it out alive without the help of an angel in the produce section. She agreed to give me cooking lessons, but it's our chemistry that really turns up the heat. Until the press gets wind of our nightly ritual. Can I trust that her feelings are genuine, or is she just another gold digger?
He might know his way around a boardroom, but he's lost in the kitchen. He offered me an ungodly sum to teach him how to cook, money I could pour into my food truck and ensure its success. But when sparks fly, I worry about mixing business and pleasure. When he accuses me of leaking our relationship to the press, he has his assistant break up with me over the phone. Ouch. So why do I miss him so much?
Chapter 1. How in the heck was I supposed to find anything in here? Even if I did manage to locate a handful of ingredients, I didn't have much faith in my ability to fashion them into something edible. First things first, I reminded myself. I would at least make an attempt to feed myself before giving up and calling for delivery. I couldn't remember the last time I'd been in a grocery store. By the time I was out of my parents' house and in college, I'd already written the algorithm that would end up making me a mint. Coding was something that made sense to me. Clean, ordered, completely reliable, I preferred to spend my days working in an organized realm, with its structured language and discrete project-based sensibilities. It was only when I stepped away from my computer that things tended toward chaos. At least, they did if I was left in charge. Which is why I'd hired William Forsythe. He was my man Friday in all things outside the coding realm. He helped find the right people to deal with the day-to-day operations of my business, as well as my household. I'd always considered Will as something more than an employee. Something closer to a friend. Until he betrayed me. Will was the whole reason I was standing in the middle of the produce section of the supermarket, trying to figure out what goes into a salad. If he hadn't walked off the job, my household staff wouldn't have followed. My estate required 2 full-time housekeepers, a chef, and a gardener. And all of them trailed after Will when he left. Even the gardener. Will claimed I was unable to do anything but work. That I spent too much of my time locked away in my home office, spitting out code, but interacting with almost no one. I'd reminded him of my official call into XC Unlimited every morning to check in on business. Will had said that didn't count because I generally only listened and didn't actually talk. Besides, the calls only lasted about 5 minutes. When I pointed out that I assigned workflow during those calls, Will had the audacity to ask me the names of the people on the call each morning. I refused to accept that my not knowing their names proved Will's point. My valet/assistant/right-hand man told me I was missing out on life. But if life was wandering around a store looking for the least labor-intensive product to put in my hungry belly, I'd beg to differ. I was hunkered down next to the avocados, trying to determine how to tell if one was ripe, when the most beautiful creature I'd ever seen came walking toward me. Her hair was dark and heavy, flowing down her back like molten midnight. Hazel eyes flashed gold against her tan skin. And those lips, God, those lips were made for kissing. I couldn't take my eyes off her curves as she paused beside me, reaching for one of the avocados. She gently held it, then set it down, picking up another. I was mesmerized until I realized she was putting the avocados in the cart she was pushing. If I didn't say something soon, she'd walk out of my life. Like my assistant. And both my housekeepers. And the chef. And my gardener. You look like a woman who understands avocados. It was the lamest thing I could have said. She looked up, confused, her hand frozen mid-avocado grab. I'm sorry. It's just, I'm not sure how to tell if an avocado is ripe. The dark-haired beauty gave me a grin, one that said, I'm nice to crazy people. It's not too difficult. It's all about touch. Those words coming from her lips sent a warm rush through me. I was speechless, unable to respond. I watched as she lifted an avocado up and held it out toward me. Feel it. Hard, right? It was like she had a line into my body. I closed my eyes and told myself to behave. Swallowing, I managed to croak out a yep. I saw her put the avocado back and pull another one out of her cart. Now try this one. If you squeeze oh so gently, you can feel how it's starting to soften, right? I pressed against the avocado in her hand, my finger accidentally brushing against her. Even that tiny contact sent tingles all over my skin. Yes. Soft. I wasn't thinking about the avocado then, but her skin. I longed to brush against more than her finger. Here, she said, digging in the pile of green lumps again. This one is ripe. She passed the avocado to me, then gave me a quick nod and a grin. Good luck. I realized she was about to walk away, which sent alarm bells blaring in my head. Wait. Her expression was patient but puzzled. Yes? That is, I could tell I was stammering, but I couldn't help myself. I didn't want her to go, but I wasn't sure how to convince her to stay. Figuring honesty remained the best policy, I blurted out what I needed. I'm lost in the kitchen, and I have no idea what I'm doing. I haven't eaten all day. Could you please help me? She gave a short laugh, but it wasn't mean-spirited, more like surprised. You poor thing, she said, shaking her head. I suppose I can help you find a few things. My chest expanded, infatuation hitting me like the mythical arrow of Cupid. I'd come looking for a meal, but I'd found something far better.
Chapter 2. The last thing I expected to find at the grocery store that night was a tall, handsome stranger who didn't know the first thing about feeding himself. Food was my bread and butter, so to speak, so he was lucky to fall into friendly hands. Besides, I couldn't leave him wandering around the produce section like a lost puppy. I'm Astrid, I said, holding out my hand. Zen, he replied, shaking my hand and causing a flush to cover my skin. What was it about this guy that caught my interest where so many others had failed? I'd been working on getting my business up and running, and I had no time for a relationship, which meant I did my best to ignore attractive members of the male species. But Zen, well, I could as much ignore him as I could my stovetop when something was burning. In a word, Zen was hot. So what exactly is your goal here? I asked, noticing that he didn't even have a basket with him. Well, as I'm left to fend for myself, I'm hoping to find something that's simple to prepare. I thought salad would be a good start. I looked him up and down. He was lithe but fit, and from the way his tight t-shirt fit, I could tell he was packing some muscle under his clothing. Salad wasn't going to cut it. I think you're headed in the right direction, but a big strong guy like you isn't going to get full on lettuce alone. We'll need some protein to help us out. I walked around the produce section, grabbing items that he could throw together into a Mediterranean salad, while keeping an eye out for the items I needed. The store was unfamiliar to me, as I generally didn't shop at expensive markets like this one. But I'd just gotten permission to park my food truck in a location within a neighborhood that bordered the beach. Summer was just getting started, and I hoped I'd make a hefty profit in my new spot. However, the neighborhood was much ritzier than where I'd previously parked my truck. I knew my new patrons would be expecting organic fare with an upscale flair, which meant I was shopping at the expensive, all-organic market nearby my new location. The prices made my eyeballs nearly pop out of my head, but I hoped to make back my investment. Let's hope beachgoers will think my food truck is hip and not sad. Zan watched as I gathered some ingredients and started filling the cart up. Now that we've got the produce, let's pick up a few more things to round off this meal. As we walked toward the butcher counter, I eyed the tall male beside me. He was dressed simply, which in no way detracted from his handsomeness. His hair was a little shaggy, a blonde chased with natural lowlights, which complemented his bright blue eyes. We were close enough that I could catch his scent, something that reminded me of the ocean. Boy, did he make my heart beat faster. I wondered again what it was about Zan that broke through the wall I'd built around myself. Maybe it was his crooked smile. Or the way he looked at me, like I was an expert on all things food-related. I guess he really is in desperate straits. Can I assume you've got the basics in your pantry? Herbs? Spices? Oils? Zan's brow furrowed. I can't say for certain, but I assume so. I wondered why he wasn't certain, but told myself it didn't matter. It was better to help him and go our separate ways. Even if I was more attracted to him than I had been to anyone in a long time, I knew I didn't have time for a relationship. My business was my life currently. I grabbed some salmon from the butcher, trying not to blink at the prices. I wanted salmon for my truck's fish tacos, but now I was worried about my budget. In the end, I decided to buy the expensive fish and go without a few creature comforts that month to make up for it. Not that there were many creature comforts left to lose. A few more stops, and I had everything I needed for my menu. I'd also gathered all the ingredients Zan needed for a decent and easy-to-assemble salad. We stopped before the checkout lanes. You've got all the ingredients for a salad that will fill you up. Just sear the salmon with a little bit of olive oil and season to taste. You can pull together a simple dressing with olive oil, some parsley, garlic, oregano, salt and pepper, then just squeeze the juice of that lemon into the mixture. For the salad itself, it's just the romaine, cucumber, tomato, onion, avocado, feta cheese crumbles, and the olives. Easy peasy. Zan looked at me like I'd lost my mind. I can't do all of that. Sure you can. All you need is right here. You just need to chop it up and put it together. Okay, but what's a sear? And how do I know what seasonings to include to taste? And how do I cut up the avocado? Just slice through the green shell? Oh dear, I said, realizing he literally didn't know anything about cooking. You can help me. His eyes lit up. If you'll come over and show me how to make this salad, I'll pay for all your groceries. My mouth fell open. My cart was full to almost overflowing, and the ingredients in there weren't cheap. Being able to save this money would certainly help. But going to his house, that sounded a bit risky. Especially because I was already attracted to him. I don't know. He flashed me his crooked smile, steepling his hands in front of me and practically begging me to help him. He was so adorable the yes slipped out before I could stop it. Zan started emptying the cart onto the belt, and I watched as the amount of the register climbed and climbed. It was over $300 by the time the clerk finished ringing us up, but Zan didn't hesitate, pulling out a shiny black card and shoving it into the card reader. When everything was bagged and back in the cart, he passed me a business card. My address is on the back. I nodded, noting that it wasn't far from here. I'll be there in about an hour. I need to go home and put these groceries away. I hurried home, shoving the ingredients in the fridge and asking myself if I'd made the right decision. I wouldn't back out, being a woman of my word, but I was feeling a little nervous. As I was driving to Zan's place, Mandy called, asking about the truck's new location. I got it. Woohoo. My best friend always celebrated my little victories. Mandy was a chef herself at an established well-to-do restaurant. This is going to be perfect for summer. I hope so. Then I told her about meeting Zan and agreeing to help him put together his dinner. Why can't he do it himself? Does he still live with her mother and she's out of town? I giggled. I didn't ask. I was too busy drooling over how handsome he is. Well, you better text me when you get there, just in case he's an axe murderer. It's always the handsome ones that you least expect. Yes, dear, I said, laughing. I'm just pulling up now. I came around a curve in the driveway, a massive house now exposed to my gaze. Whoa, I breathed. This guy must be loaded. The house was 3 stories, a sprawling mansion surrounded by trees, with the ocean as its backdrop. It had to be worth millions. Multi-millions. No wonder $300 was no big deal to him. Get him hooked on your cooking, Mandy said. That way he'll invest in your truck. Or wife you up. I shook my head, chuckling. I'm going now. Rich guys can be axe murderers too, you know. I hung up on my friend.
Chapter 3. I was having a hard time focusing on the cooking lesson. Could you blame me? Astrid was smoking hot, and although I was definitely focusing on her mouth, I couldn't pay much attention to the words coming out of it. You want to peel your garlic before you cut it. An easy trick is to place the side of your knife against the clove and give it a little hit, like this she demonstrated by bringing her fist down on the knife's side, and it peels really easy. Astrid held up the naked garlic clove, a grin on her face, and I realized that I was falling hard and fast for her. It had taken her less than a minute to get acquainted with my kitchen, and she was moving around with confidence, which was filling my insides with warmth. There was something about having this woman in my space, doing something so intimately domestic, that was working for me. I watched as she prepped the various pieces of the salad, then showed me how to sear a couple salmon fillets. Astrid made everything look effortless, which indicated that she was truly skilled in the art of cooking. Not only did she do everything well, but she looked fantastic doing it. It seems that your kitchen is pretty well stocked, she pointed out as the salmon sizzled in the pan. What's changed around here? Who used to do the cooking? I winced. Not only talented and beautiful, but perceptive as well. I had a chef. He recently left, along with the rest of my staff. When her eyes widened, I hurried to reassure her. It wasn't because I mistreated them. They were paid well and given good benefits. It's because of my assistant or former assistant, Will. He decided to meddle in my life once again, and well, when he walked off the job, the rest of them followed him. He must be a good assistant, she said, a mischievous twinkle in her eye. The best. Except for the meddling. What was your disagreement about? I leaned back against the counter and crossed my arms over my chest. Will thinks I work too much. Astrid chuckled. That's it? I was forced to grin. Well, that's where it starts. I'm always busy coding instead of finding other meaningful things to care about. He thinks I'm too insulated, that if I didn't have a staff of people to do things for me, I'd be forced to come up for air and learn to fend for myself. I see, she said, trying to disguise her grin. I'm a bit of a workaholic myself, so I understand your predicament, but self-care is also important. Which is why I'm learning to make salmon salad, I said, motioning toward the stove where she was just finishing up with the fish pieces. Astrid laughed, and it was a sound I was quickly becoming addicted to. Well, let me show you how to put everything together. I watched as she put the finishing touches on the salad. Passing the bowl to me, she smiled. All you need now is a plate and a fork, and you're good to go. How about 2 plates and 2 forks? I asked, suddenly inspired to invite her to dinner. There's plenty for both of us. I could see her considering my offer. She bit her lip, and the sight sent a wave of desire rushing through me. Astrid looked at me, then the salad, then back at me. I suppose it couldn't hurt, she said at last. I need to eat, and it's getting a little late to go home and cook for myself. And you already made an amazing meal, so why not dig in? I said, bolstering her argument. It took me a few tries to find the cabinet that hid the plates, but soon we were at the large kitchen island, taking our first bites. This is good, I said, savoring that bite. Really good. Thanks, she said, smiling. And it's easy enough for you to do on your own. I don't know about that, I thought but didn't say. I was too busy drooling over the chef to notice much of the preparation. You do this very well. Are you a professional chef? It was meant as a compliment, but I was beginning to wonder if it was true. Not quite, she replied after dabbing her mouth with a napkin. Although I do cook for a living. I own a food truck, Café Cruz, and I do all the cooking myself. A food truck. That's like owning your own restaurant. Again, not quite, but it's on the way to owning one. A food truck has much lower overhead though, since it lacks staff and square footage. Maybe someday I'll be successful enough to transition to a restaurant though. That is the dream. It seems more like a certainty than a dream, I said, taking another bite of the delicious salad. If you cook everything else as well as you nailed this salad, you're certain to bring in plenty of customers. I caught the blush creeping up her cheeks, and it only made her prettier. You're too kind. Actually, I'm a little worried at the moment. I just moved my truck to a location that's on the main access road for a couple popular beaches. I'm betting on more upscale fare bringing in some new customers over the summer, but it's a big change from the simple menu I've been working from so far. You're going to do great, I said with assurance. You'll make a fortune on the coast, I'm positive. Thank you for the encouragement, she said, lifting her water glass in my direction. From your mouth to God's ears. Too bad I wasn't concerned about my mouth being anywhere near God's ears. I wanted it pressed against her lips, kissing her senseless.
Chapter 4. Zan was making me blush with all of his compliments. And the way he was staring at me was giving me shivers. The sexual tension in the room was high enough to drown in, but I was trying hard to keep the focus on the food. You know, you can take this base salad and add different proteins easily enough, I said, hoping to encourage him to continue his experimenting with learning to cook. And there are a ton of internet videos showing you how to cook anything from tacos to filet mignon, so I'm sure you'll be able to learn to fend for yourself pretty easily. It would be easier if I had your passion for cooking. I wasn't sure how to respond to that, as the word passion sent my thoughts in a different direction. I dabbed my face with my napkin, trying to hide yet another blush. My cheeks were redder than a schoolgirl's. I wasn't sure what it was about Zan that made such an impact. Maybe it was because he was the handsomest man I'd ever seen. Or maybe it was his laser-like focus. Or his intelligence. Or sense of humor. And there was the fact that he was obviously filthy rich. The house was like something you'd see in a magazine about interior design. It was perfectly decorated, so tasteful and elegant. And the views. Puget Sound seemed to be outside every window, making for a panorama of ocean and sky. It wasn't his money, or the expensive bottle of wine he'd opened to accompany dinner. It wasn't just his charm and his good looks either. There was something about Zan that got under my skin, something in his eyes, in the way he'd looked wandering around the supermarket. Like he was lost and just waiting for someone to find him. I took another sip of wine, reminding myself that the someone I was thinking of wasn't me. I was way out of my league here. Besides, I had plenty on my plate without worrying about a relationship. It didn't stop me from feeling a little disappointed at that thought. I finished my salad and figured it was about time to leave, before the sexual tension got any deeper, and I started to make some questionable choices. Thank you for dinner, I said, and the groceries. I hope I've been some small help, but I think you might have just overpaid for your dinner. I liked the sound of Zan's chuckle. How could I put a price tag on learning to cook? In fact, I think you've engendered the beginnings of a passion in me. There's that word again. I had to start fanning myself. But I'm smart enough to know that one lesson doesn't make me a chef, he continued. So how about you come back every day this week and teach me something new? I'll pay you for your time, and I'll determine if I really can learn to fend for myself, or if I better invest in a new staff. I looked at him, surprised by the offer. You want me to come back? He nodded. Give me a few more cooking lessons, and I'll make sure you're well compensated for your skills. I don't think, I began, but he interrupted me with a figure that made my jaw drop. How does $100,000 sound? I picked up the glass of wine and took a gulp, then coughed when it went down the wrong pipe. Embarrassed, I hid my face behind my hand for a moment to think. Are you okay? He asked, his tone full of concern. I'm just contemplating your offer. And how insane it is. $100,000 to give Zan a few lessons in cooking. He can't be serious, right? That money would go a long way to making sure I survived my first year of food truck ownership. In fact, I could invest some of it into upgrades to the truck, and I wouldn't have to worry about ingredient costs. But he couldn't be serious, could he? As if reading my mind, he answered, "I'm serious. I'll make out the check right now if you like." "No. That's, all right." I blinked, wondering if I was really going to take this crazy bargain. I'd be a fool not to, wouldn't I? But in the end I couldn't charge him that much. "You know you're offering way too much money." "I disagree," he replied. "You're worth it." It was too much to pass up. "You've got yourself a deal." "I'm so glad to hear that." Warmth suffused his voice and it made me tingle. I stood up, grabbing my bag and saying farewell. "I've really got to get going. I've got an early morning with the new location and all." Zan walked me to the door, thanking me for the meal and saying that he looked forward to our class tomorrow. I nodded, feeling overwhelmed, but remembered at the last minute to consider tomorrow's dinner. "I'll text you a list of ingredients," I said, remembering that the card he'd given me had his number. "And I'll be over around 8 o'clock. On my ride home, Mandy called again. "No axes, I take it?" "No, but he did have a killer bottle of wine." "So things went well," she said, her smile evident in her tone. "Too well. It seems I've booked myself a part-time job giving cooking lessons." Mandy sounded surprised. "You don't have time for that, lady." "Well, for the salary of $100,000, I figured I better make time." "Are you kidding me? How many lessons do you have to give?" 1 million? "Just a few." And I couldn't believe it either, but he offered me a check right then. "I'd be wary, just in case he needs a kidney and you're some kind of match or something." I laughed. "I'll make sure to avoid all things kidney-related. I won't even mention kidney beans." It was Mandy's turn to laugh. "Let me know if he needs a tutor. I'd be willing to jump at the low price of $50,000. Was that a little flash of jealousy at the thought of Mandy spending time with Zan? I pushed it away, chastising myself. I barely knew the guy, and besides, I wasn't looking for a relationship. That didn't stop me from dreaming about Zan that night. He was wearing a Kiss the Cook apron, and nothing else.
Chapter 5. The ingredients for today's dinner were on the counter, except for those that even I knew belonged in a refrigerator. It hadn't been easy, and it had required the help of 3 different grocery clerks, but I'd managed to get everything on Astrid's list. Now all that was missing was Astrid. It seemed to take forever for 8 o'clock to come. I was usually able to drown out everything when I coded, but today her face kept popping up in my mind, breaking my concentration. Astrid wasn't like other women, easily forgotten. She lingered in my consciousness like a half-remembered dream, haunting me with her beauty. I hadn't known her long, just a few short hours, but she'd already made her mark, and I knew that I wanted her in my home and in my life. We were both busy business owners with little room in our schedules for a relationship, but maybe this time there was something more important than making money to consider. My phone rang, and I answered it. The familiar voice of my ex-assistant, Will, made its way into my ears. "Hey there, Mr. Campbell. How you holding up?" I held back a sigh at the use of my last name. Will only called me Mr. Campbell when he thought I was doing something stupid. "Will, I didn't expect to hear from you, since you terminated yourself. I prefer to think of it as an unscheduled sabbatical. Does that mean you'll be coming back to annoy me at some unknown future date?" Will breathed out a chuckle. "It depends on whether you see reason. Whenever you're ready to admit that there's more to life than work, I might be persuaded back, along with the rest of your staff. Would you like to welcome back the people who make your life in a bubble possible every day?" "I'm not sure I need them," I said, trying to inject an equal measure of disguised snark into my rejoinder. "I'm learning to take care of myself. I've even hired someone to teach me how to cook." Will's intake of breath let me know he was surprised. "It sounds like you're finally doing something other than working, so color me happy." His reply piqued my temper. "I don't understand why you are obstinate about my lifestyle. I pay you all well, and I don't ask for much. What did I do to deserve this betrayal?" I knew I was playing it a little over the top, but betrayal was what it amounted to, and I wasn't going to shy away from that fact. "We're worried about you," Will replied. "We're afraid you'll work your life away and never experience what living is truly for." I couldn't think of much a response beyond grumbling, "Suit yourself." "We weren't expecting to stay away so long," Will hinted. "We thought you'd come to your senses that first day, but it's clear you haven't." "Thought you could starve me out, huh?" "Sorry, not with my new cooking instructor." Will sounded intrigued. "What overpriced chef have you hired to give you lessons?" "She's not a chef. She owns a food truck." The silence on the other end of the line let me know Will had gone from surprised to shocked. "Food truck?" The doorbell rang at that moment, and my heart beat faster, knowing that Astrid was finally here. "Got to go. My instructor has arrived." I could hear Will stuttering in the background, but I hung up, not caring what further excuses he had for leaving me. My focus belonged entirely to Astrid now. She greeted me with a grin when she walked in the door, and that grin shoved its way into my heart, making me feel giddy, like a child presented with a pony. But Astrid was better than a pet. She was everything I'd wanted in a female but never thought I'd find. She was genuine, articulate, intelligent. She was kind, compassionate, and caring. And she was so sexy it made me clench my hands into fists and push them into my pockets to keep me from grabbing her and carrying her off to my bedroom for hours of lovemaking. "Did you get everything we need?" she asked, and I almost forgot to respond, so wrapped up was I in watching her walk down the hallway. "Yes," I finally said when she turned around with an inquisitive look. "Good. Tonight's lesson should be a breeze." I nodded, wondering if I'd even be able to taste the food she was about to prepare. It seemed like Astrid owned all of my senses now, and everything else in the world paled in comparison to her. The only thing I wanted to taste was her.
Chapter 6. Tonight I'm going to teach you something that every person should know how to prepare. Pasta. I got down to business with the most important part of any pasta dish, the sauce. I usually like to simmer my tomato sauce all day, but we don't have time for that, so let's get the ingredients in the pot so we can move on to the meatballs. With you around, I don't think I need the stove to make things simmer. My eyes widened and I turned to my host. "I'm sorry?" Zan's eyes were glazed and he was staring at me with that lopsided grin. He suddenly realized I'd heard him and straightened, shaking his head. "I was, asking about the sauce. How long did you say you would normally simmer it?" I hid a grin, flattered that this gorgeous guy thought I was just as hot as he was. I gave him a chance to peel and cut the garlic today, making him practice what I'd preached during our last lesson. He did a halfway decent job, so I assigned him the tomatoes. We'll have to resort to canned tomatoes and paste because of the time limit, but I like to include fresh as well just to give it some extra flavor. I wonder what flavor his kisses are, I thought to myself, then started to blush. I bet they're both sweet and savory. How could I stop after just one? Pushing the thought of a make-out session with Zan out of my brain, I stirred everything together and moved on to spices. Spice is the essence of a good sauce. I like to go simple, I said as I showed him how to season the sauce. "How do you know when you've got enough spice in there?" he asked. "Good question," I replied. "You taste it." I dipped a spoon in the sauce and held it up to his lips. His eyes met mine and I noticed they were filled with heat, which caused a tightness in my chest. I almost forgot to breathe when he licked his lips afterwards. "Delicious," he murmured, staring straight into my eyes and making me wonder if he was talking about the food. My arousal made it difficult to concentrate, but I somehow made it through how to put together some decent meatballs. They were baking in the oven when I moved on to boiling pasta, then set Zan on making a simpler salad than yesterday. I was impressed by the things he remembered, and his little mnemonics for the process. Peel the carrots and then shred. Take the lettuce off its head. Chop the onions but don't cry. Tomatoes and cucumbers, oh my. Into the bowl the olives tumble. Don't forget the fetas crumble. It was hard not to giggle at the sing-song way he coached himself, but I was proud that he'd already mastered what we'd covered yesterday. Soon it was time to eat. "You'll join me again for dinner?" he asked, but his voice said it was a foregone conclusion. "It smells so good, how could I not?" Seated at the island again, we both dug into tonight's feast. "This," Zan said, pointing at his plate. "This is heavenly." I beamed under his compliment. "It's pretty simple, as you've seen. There's no reason you can't pull the meal together yourself. With the help of a little rhyme, of course." I expected him to be embarrassed, but he just chuckled and took another bite. There was this quiet confidence about him that I envied. While I was confident in my own abilities when it came to cooking, there wasn't much else in which I considered myself an expert. If our roles had been reversed, I didn't think I could act with such self-assurance. "How did your first day on the coast go?" I smiled, touched that he'd thought to ask. "Pretty well. I'm still fiddling with the new menu, but several customers said they'd enjoyed the food and would be back." Zan nodded. "I imagine you'll be having to turn away the crowds within a week." "If only," I laughed. As we talked, I could feel the sexual tension ramping up once again, but tonight it didn't rattle me. Instead, I sat with the feeling, enjoying it. I hadn't been out on a date in ages, and although I kept telling myself this wasn't a date, I could feel a connection humming between us. Why not just let the fantasy last, at least as long as dinner? Afterwards, I lent Zan a hand in cleaning up. It was a good thing I did, because yesterday's dishes sat unwashed in the dishwasher. "I didn't know how to get it started," Zan admitted sheepishly. I showed him how his dishwasher functioned, then stored the rest of the pasta for his lunch tomorrow. I was just turning away from the fridge when Zan was passing, causing us to bump into each other. Zan grabbed me, steadying me, and before I realized it, his lips were pressed against mine, stealing my breath away. It was like being hit with a tidal wave, and I quickly surrendered to the onslaught of pleasure. When we came up for air, I pulled away, my face flushed. "Amazing," he said, staring at my mouth in a way that said we'd be doing that again real soon. I backed away a few steps. That is, it was very nice, but we should keep things professional. We've both got busy lives and..." Taking a step forward, Zan interrupted me. I haven't felt this way about anyone in a long time. Both his tone and his expression were steeped in intensity. You're very attractive, but neither of us is really in the position to start a new relationship. You told me yourself you're a workaholic. And I've got the food truck to consider." It sounded lame coming out of my mouth, but I knew that if I didn't nip things in the bud, I would fall fast for Zan. He nodded, then turned away, trying to hide his disappointment. "Text me the list for tomorrow?" "I will," I said, grabbing my things and heading out the door. It took a long time to fall asleep that night, so I was groggy when the phone rang early the next morning. I was still half asleep when I answered it. "Did you see the gossip blogs? You're all over them." "Huh?" I recognized Mandy's voice, but what she was saying sounded like nonsense. "Gossip blogs?" "Yeah, honey. Someone got a picture of you leaving your student's mansion, and they've splashed you all over, calling you the mystery woman who snagged a billionaire." I blinked into the sunlight streaming through a crack in my curtains. "Billionaire?" I murmured, my brain unable to comprehend what had happened. "You can use this," Mandy said. "Free publicity for the food truck." "No," I responded immediately. "This is a misunderstanding, and I don't want the press to think something more is going on here. Besides, I wouldn't use Zan like that. It doesn't seem right." Mandy said she understood, then sent me some links. By the time I'd finished reading them, I wanted to put the blanket over my head and stay in bed for the rest of the day. I didn't have the luxury, but I could comfort myself with the fact that the press didn't know who I was. If I can just stay a mystery for the rest of the week, I'm golden. I should have known that things are never that easy.
Chapter 7. Mr. Campbell, I'm afraid a little issue has arisen. Issue? I asked, looking over the ingredient list Astrid had sent. What issue? It was my publicist on the line, and she sounded nervous, which is never good. Well, sir, it seems your name is popping up in the media today. We can get ahead of the story, announcing your relationship or denying it. Just let me know which way you want to go. Relationship? What are you talking about? I'm sending you a few links now. There's a woman who was photographed coming out of your house last night, and she's not been verified as one of your staff. The press thinks you've got a mystery girlfriend. I looked at the first link and saw the photograph. Astrid was there, larger than life and looking as beautiful as ever. In that moment, I wished she was my mystery girlfriend, but she seemed settled on keeping things professional. It was a bigger disappointment than when the staff walked out on me. I have no interest in what the press thinks of my private life, I said, with perhaps too much force. Because I chose to keep to myself and focus on my work, the press had dubbed me as some kind of rich recluse, Seattle's most eligible bachelor, if you could only find a way into my estate, since I tended not to leave the grounds. I was used to the occasional mention of my name when stock prices soared or a new product was launched. But I'd yet to be tied to a woman, which was probably why it was such big news today. I can say we have no comment, my publicist replied, her voice skeptical. Sounds good. I hung up, set on putting the issue out of my mind, but it was easier said than done. I wondered how anyone could have found out about Astrid. There hadn't been paparazzi around the house in ages, since the time there was a rumor circulating about my company being acquired by a huge venture capital firm. Why would the press be lurking around now, snapping pictures of my guest? Maybe Astrid leaked the story herself. I froze at the thought. Could she have? It didn't seem likely. Astrid hadn't known who I was when we met, and I wasn't sure she even knew who I was now. Besides, she didn't come off as someone who used others to get ahead. I dismissed the thought from my mind, focusing on work, and soon fell into the cocoon of coding. It was getting late when I realized I had yet to pick up the ingredients for dinner tonight, and I rushed out to the market. As I shopped, the thought entered my mind again. Who could have known about Astrid? It was still on my mind when she arrived, announcing that tonight was chicken night. She was deep in her lesson, and I realized I'd barely heard a word of it. I was so distracted by the thought. When she mentioned being careful not to let the hot oil leak out of the chicken when handling it, I couldn't hold it in anymore. Speaking of leaks, did you happen to see your picture in the press? Astrid froze, then looked over, her expression neutral. Yes. My friend called me up and let me know I was the mystery woman of the North Woods. Her smile said she was expecting a chuckle, but I couldn't manage one. It's strange that they knew you were here, isn't it? Astrid nodded. I figured that maybe someone stakes out your house looking for action from time to time, and they were in the right place at the right time. I shook my head. Press around the estate is rare. Huh, she said, turning back to the pan where the chicken was frying. As she continued her lesson, I relaxed, telling myself I was being foolish. Astrid was too genuine to try to manipulate the situation or sell her story to the press. I pushed the thought out of my mind and concentrated on the cooking. When she started advising on the plating, I stood alongside her, helping to dish out the vegetables. Our hips were touching, our shoulders rubbing. After that, I made it my mission to touch her in as many surreptitious ways as possible. I tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear for her when she cleaned out the hot pan. I adjusted her apron when the tie came loose, running my hands along her waist to make sure it was positioned correctly. I stood behind her, looking over her shoulder as she pointed out the ratios of protein to vegetable on the plate, my breath disturbing the tiny hairs on her neck. I couldn't help but want to be close to her. She was quickly becoming the only thing I could think about. Now if I could just get her to feel the same way about me.
Chapter 8. It wasn't easy to concentrate on dinner that night. The food was good, but the company was driving me wild. Sharing a kitchen with Zan was becoming more difficult by the day, but I didn't want to give it up. I knew he was finding reasons to touch me, to get close, but it felt so good, I wasn't going to fight it. I could tell now that I was falling fast for the handsome billionaire. Zan was so smart, so funny, so utterly charming, that he was impossible to resist. And that kiss last night, it had been burned into my brain so that all day I'd had it on repeat in my memory. Over and over I replayed our lips coming together, and even though I'd said otherwise, I couldn't help hoping he'd kiss me again. Tonight the tension was thick enough to smother me. I cast about, looking for topics that would take my mind off how hot Zan was and how much I wanted to shove the plates off this table and shove him down on it, having my way with him. So, I know you've got mega money, but how did you make it exactly? Zan chuckled. I guess you could say I'm a coder, but it's a little more complicated than that. I write algorithms that become the building block of software. I'm really good at what I do, so my software sells. An algorithm. That's math, right? His crooked grin was back, making me blush. Kind of. It's more like a logic sequence. So it tells the computer what to do. Sort of. It's the basis for instructions, but the algorithm has to be translated into the computer's language, so the software can perform its function. I shook my head, overwhelmed. I can barely remember to check my email. I think algorithms are a bit over my head. Zan chuckled. What a pretty head it is. And so full of delicious recipes, he said, holding up his fork full of chicken. How did you become interested in cooking in the first place? I leaned back, dabbing at my lips with the napkin, and taking a drink of water before answering. I spent a lot of time with my grandmother when I was a little girl. My mother remarried after my father left, and her new husband wasn't that fond of me. Grandma's house was a lifesaver. She was a fantastic cook, and she taught me everything she knew. Your stepdad wasn't that fond of you? Was that feeling mutual? Trust Zan to pick up on the part I wanted to talk about the least. I nodded. We didn't get along, especially when I got older. We argued a lot. He didn't have a very high estimation of me. Ridiculous, Zan barked. I shrugged. He thought I was a fool to pursue food as a career. When I told him I wanted to be a chef, he said I didn't have it in me. The man is a fool, Zan said, his vehemence surprising me. You're an excellent cook, and you'd be a phenomenal chef. I have every confidence that you'll own your own chain of restaurants someday. I couldn't help blushing, and I even felt my eyes filling with tears. Blinking them back, I concentrated on my plate, thanking him for his kind words. We finished the meal, the room quiet as I tried to fight my feelings for Zan. It was becoming harder and harder to stick to my guns. I wanted him, more than I wanted to do what was good for me. We were cleaning up when Zan broke the silence. It's a nice night out there. How about we go for a walk along the water? I glanced out the window and saw the moon high above the ocean. I knew then that it would be dangerous to be that close to Zan in such a romantic atmosphere. I guess it's time to live dangerously. I'd love to. The sand felt good between my toes, and the waves, although cold, were pleasant as they lapped at our feet. Zan put his arm around my waist and I pressed in closer to him as we stared out over the expanse of deep blue water. It's beautiful, I whispered. You're beautiful, he whispered back. This time when he kissed me, I was ready for it. Fireworks exploded inside me as he seized my lips, his mouth soft against mine, but his motions urgent. The heat was quickly raging out of control as I wrapped my body around his. Stay with me tonight, he said when we came up for air. Please. I blinked up at him, wanting to stay more than I'd wanted anything in a long time. But I couldn't. Things were moving too fast, and I had to get my libido under control before I did something stupid. I can't. I'm sorry. I've got to be up early for the truck and, my words petered out when I saw the disappointment on his face. This time, he didn't bother to hide it. While it was flattering to know how much he wanted me, it just made it harder to walk away every night. Am I making a mistake? Should I throw caution to the wind? The mood was broken, and we turned to make our way back to his house. I thanked him for the dinner, then told him I'd be over tomorrow for our last lesson. It was hard to say those words, so I hurried to my car afterwards, before the lump in my throat got too large to talk around. As I was driving home, I was slowly coming to my senses. Zan was a billionaire, and although I seemed to be able to distract him now, he was wedded to his job. Although we seemed to enjoy each other's company, I couldn't determine if we had anything strong enough to build a relationship on. Food wasn't a strong enough foundation. Neither was lust. Was I being a fool, letting things progress like they had? Or maybe I was being overly cautious. Why not give in and have a fling with Zan? We could distract each other for a while, and when things ended, as they would, I could have the memory of our time together. I swallowed hard at the thought. Could I really do that? Could I let my lust run free? No, I decided. There was no way I could walk away without getting hurt. I had to face facts. I was already in love with Zan.
Chapter 9. When I woke up that morning, a smile was already on my face. It must have been the memory of kissing Astrid in the moonlight. Although she'd turned me down when I asked her to stay, hope sprang eternal. I was going to pull out all the stops tonight to make my offer irresistible. I hopped out of bed, hitting my personal gym for an hour before heading into the shower. I was dressed and ready to venture into the world to find the supplies needed for my graduation from cooking classes. But first, I was going to try my hand at putting together breakfast. Scrambling some eggs didn't seem so hard, and I thought I could manage not to burn the toast today. As I worked, my mind kept returning to Astrid. She was all I could think about lately, which didn't seem to bother me. Even when I stopped coding in the middle of a solid stretch, because I couldn't stop thinking about her eyes, her lips, her curves. I wanted Astrid on my mind permanently, because life was starting to feel empty without her. That's when the idea popped into my head. If tonight went the way I hoped it would, I would ask Astrid to move in with me. It made sense, being as how I was closer to her food truck, and my kitchen was large and well equipped for food prep. Plus, I'd get to see her every morning and every night. It was a win-win situation. On my second batch of eggs, I finally got the result I wanted, or at least one that looked mostly edible. The toast only got a little black around the edges today, so overall, my breakfast attempt was a success. I just sat down to eat when my phone rang. When I saw it was my publicist, I almost didn't answer it. As soon as she spoke, my heart dropped. The press has identified the mystery woman. They've even got a picture of her in front of her food cart. The worst headline is probably cruising for cash. How clever, I said, feeling sick to my stomach. One of the outlets is teasing a forthcoming interview. How do you want to play this? I set down my fork and tried to think of a response. Do nothing for now. But sir, they're going to assume you sanctioned this. And do you know what she's going to say at this interview? Do nothing, I repeated, then hung up the phone. I stared down at the plate in front of me, my appetite completely vanished. I considered tossing it into the wall, just to hear the thing shatter, but I remembered that I'd be the one to clean it up. Besides, my heart was shattering, so there was really no need. If Astrid was giving an interview, then I knew where the leak had come from. I couldn't believe she'd do this. Maybe I wasn't the judge of character I thought I was. Standing up, I abandoned breakfast and wandered out on the patio. It was a warm day, with only a few fluffy clouds in the otherwise sunny sky. And I was absolutely miserable. I threw myself into one of the chairs and sat there, unable to think of anything except Astrid's betrayal. I thought about what she'd told me last night, the sob story about her stepfather. I'd wanted to go out and pound the man flat, but now I wondered if he even existed. A woman who could manipulate me while going to the press behind my back was capable of lying about a whole host of things, including her past. There was only one thing left to do. So why couldn't I bring myself to do it? In the end, I couldn't hear her voice again, so I called the one person I could trust to handle matters for me when I'd made a mess of them on my own. Will's voice was annoyingly chipper when he answered his phone. Well, hello there, former employer. How are you this fine day? I need you to do something for me. Indeed? And what would that be? Teach you how to do laundry. I'm surprised you haven't hired an expert to show you how yet. I ground my teeth together, on the verge of hanging up. You're going to fire someone. Will paused, then let out a loud belly laugh. You want me to fire someone for you? And I don't even work for you anymore? You're rehired, I said, my voice monotone. What is going on? He asked, his voice turning serious. Who am I firing? The woman giving me cooking lessons. She's been talking to the press behind my back. I'll text you her number. Tell her that her services are no longer needed and the check is in the mail. Whoa. Will's cheerful demeanor had vanished. How bad is it? Not bad, yet. The press thinks she's my girlfriend. But she's about to do an interview, and I don't know what she'll say, so I'd like to make sure that doesn't happen. Understood. So you'll take your old job back? There was a pause, and for a moment I thought he'd refuse me, but he finally responded. I will, if you promise not to work so much and to pay attention to the life that is passing you by. I'm painfully aware of what I'm missing now, I said, then hung up, gutted. None of this felt right, but I figured a clean break was best. How could I get a clean break when she'd done me so dirty?
Chapter 10. My hand was shaking as I hung up the phone. The interior of the food truck blurred before me, and I realized that I was crying. What the heck just happened? I'd been fired. And dumped. And not even by the guy I was quasi-involved with. Zan's assistant had told me in no uncertain terms that I was not to give the scheduled interview to the press, or I could expect legal action. I had no idea what interview he was talking about, but that didn't seem to matter. I was persona non grata with Zan, and in an instant, the dreams I hadn't even dared to have vanished. It was late afternoon, and I had the dinner rush coming up, but I suddenly couldn't put up with the crowds and the cooking. I closed up shop, then headed home to bury my pain in a pint of ice cream and trash TV. But no amount of chocolate chip and reality shows could stop my brain from turning over what happened. Will forbade me from giving an interview, but it wasn't like I had one scheduled. A few photographers had waylaid me after the first story came out, but I'd ignored them all, and I certainly hadn't agreed to any interviews. It doesn't matter now, I told myself. And it's likely for the best. We were from different worlds, so any relationship was bound to be bumpy. And if this was what I had to go through to be a billionaire's girlfriend, then maybe I wasn't cut out for it after all. The days after the phone call were a haze of misery. I didn't know how I'd become attached so quickly to the handsome workaholic, but being tossed aside by him had permanently damaged my heart. I forced myself to go to work, to cook and to smile, and to talk up my new menu full of healthy, sustainable, organic options. I might look cheerful on the outside, but inside, I felt numb. I was cleaning up after the lunch rush, when a familiar voice asked me if I knew the trick to peeling an entire head of garlic without whacking it with a fist. I stiffened, unsure if I wanted to turn around and look him in the eye. Curiosity finally got the better of me. Zan was standing outside my food truck, a huge bouquet of roses in one hand. He had a grin on his face, but his eyes were wary. Shake the cloves inside of 2 metal bowls. What are you doing here? I replied. He blinked, then jerked his thumb behind him. Maybe you can come out of the truck so we can talk. So you can accuse me of selling out to the press behind your back? I'm sorry about that, he said, his expression earnest. I made a massive mistake, and I never should have thought you capable of that. You sure did make a mistake, I said, tossing down my towel and taking off my apron. I was mad enough to confront him, so I left the truck to meet him face to face. The roses smelled lovely, but I ignored them, instead putting my hands on my hips and looking him square in the eye. Why did you come here? Because I want you back. I screwed up, I fully admit that, and you have no idea how sorry I am. My publicist finally found out the truth. I swear I should fire that woman. What truth? It was one of my housekeepers. She mentioned to her nephew that my entire staff had walked. Well, turns out the nephew is a tabloid reporter. She swore him to silence about the walkout, but the guy figured something might go down in the meantime. Once I got desperate, so he staked out the estate, and that's who took your picture that night. I nodded. Makes sense. But what about the interview? That's the reason you had your assistant fire me, right? I know you didn't schedule any interview. Will hunted down the blogger who'd promised that tidbit and cracked her pretty quickly. She admitted that she didn't have anything solid scheduled with you. She was just hoping to drum up some excitement about her blog and hopefully catch your attention long enough for you to let something slip. I'm glad you finally came to your senses. Thank you for the apology. I turned to head back into the truck, but his hand on my shoulder stopped me. Zen set the roses down on the truck's counter and moved closer. I'm an idiot. I should have known you weren't using me. If anything, I was using you. For once, I found someone to distract me from my work, and I had to admit, it was a heady feeling, spending time with you. I wanted more, but when I heard about the interview, I thought the worst. He looked down, an expression of shame on his face. It was a knee-jerk reaction, having will call you. It never should have happened. I've had a hard time trusting people, because I made my money when I was still in college. The people I thought were my friends only cared about how much money I had in the bank. That's one of the reasons I focus so hard on work. I don't really have anyone outside of it. He looked so forlorn, so lost, I could feel myself softening. Zen continued, his expression intent. You're not a gold digger, and you're not someone who would use me for your own gain. I know that now, and I'll never make the same mistake again. It was a mistake, and so was the way you handled it. I don't want to be in a relationship with a guy who would make his assistant dump me for him. That part still rankled. You're right. His expression said he wasn't going to give up on getting me back yet. I was totally wrong to do that, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you, if you give me another chance. He leaned in closer and cupped my cheek. Please, Astrid. Just one more chance, and I promise I'll show you how good we can be together. Looking into his eyes, I could see how truly contrite he was. From his perspective, trust must be a difficult thing. I forgave him, because in the end, I knew I'd never be happy with another man. I was still in love with Zan, and his apology deserved another chance. I'll come back to you on 2 conditions. Name them, he said, his expression eager. Number 1, you have to give Will a raise. And number 2, you have to come to me the next time you're thinking about breaking up with me. Otherwise, I'll have Will break up with you for me first. Zan laughed. Don't worry, there won't be a next time. His husky tone made me shiver. When he pulled me into his arms, I went willingly. His kiss turned me to jelly, but melting in his arms was the best sensation of all. The end.